Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. As often happens when material is transferred from the pages of books to the movie screen, many details get lost. The Dursleys were no exception, and some things connected to them never made it into the films. Let's recall those forgotten moments. Enjoy watching. Number 1. Petunia wrote to Dumbledore. Both in the books and in the films it was shown that Petunia considered her sister strange because of her magical abilities. However, the books revealed that her attitude wasn't always like this. When Lily received her Hogwarts acceptance letter, a devastated Petunia wrote to Dumbledore himself, begging him to take her along with her sister. When Lily discovered this letter, Petunia furiously called magic nonsense and rejected her earlier wishes. This moment not only shows the sisters' complicated relationship, but also the true reason behind Petunia's hatred of the wizarding world. It had rejected her personally. Number 2. Petunia and Lily were once very close. As we can see, their relationship wasn't always clouded by jealousy and resentment. Despite Vernon's words that his wife had completely cut ties with the Potters, in Lily's letter to Sirius there's a mention that the last Christmas she received a vase from her sister. Moreover, in Snape's memories, it's clear how tenderly Lily spoke to Petunia, and how painful it was for her to see her sister pushing her away. That crack in their closeness made the eventual rupture even more tragic. Number 3. Giving Harry trash as gifts. Harry's first Christmas at Hogwarts was memorable not only for the gifts he received from friends, but also for the strange present from the Dursleys, a 50-pence coin. Later he got a tissue or a toothpick from them. What was truly insulting wasn't that the presents were cheap, but that the Dursleys deliberately made the effort to show their indifference. It was as if they were shouting, "Look, you're nothing to us." Number 4. Not feeding Harry for 3 days. In the Chamber of Secrets film, Harry was simply locked in his room with bars on the window, but in the book the situation was much darker. Harry was kept captive for 3 days and was barely fed. He only got a piece of toast. The irony is striking. The Dursleys, who loved eating rich and hearty meals, chose to punish Harry by depriving him of food, the very thing they valued almost more than anything else. No wonder that when Ron and the twins rescued him, Harry was starving. Number 5. Physical abuse. The films only showed the Dursleys as psychological tormentors of Harry, but the books paint a harsher picture. Harry had learned to keep Vernon at arm's length so that the man couldn't hit him. This fact makes his childhood even sadder and explains why he was so happy to leave for Hogwarts, and why he hated going back during the holidays. Number 6. They cared for Harry only for their own protection. Dumbledore left Petunia a letter explaining that Lily's sacrifice protected Harry and everyone living with him as long as he shared a home with a blood relative. Petunia might not have understood all the details, but she knew perfectly well that the forces that killed her sister could also threaten her own family. That's why she agreed to shelter Harry, not out of love for Lily, but purely for her own safety. Number 7. Dumbledore and the Dursleys. In The Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore personally comes to the Dursleys' house to collect Harry. There he openly tells them that they failed his request. They never treated the boy like a son and always kept him in neglect and cruelty. You did not do as I asked. You never treated Harry as a son. He has known nothing but neglect and often cruelty at your hands. Although Dumbledore did not punish them directly, for readers this scene felt like a small moral victory. Number 8. Hagrid's letters and magical mail. The storm of letters in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone is played for comedy in the film, but in the book it spirals into absurd desperation. Vernon Dursley tries everything to stop Harry from reading a single word. He nails shut the letterbox, burns envelopes in the fireplace, and finally drives the family to a shack on a rock in the middle of the sea. Rowling describes him with a manic gleam in his eyes, hammering planks across the door as if the letters were an invading army. is not simply stubbornness, it is panic, the terror of losing control over the story he told about his perfectly normal family. The irony is that all of Vernon's frantic efforts only magnify the magic. Letters appear under the door, inside eggs, even raining down the chimney in hundreds. Harry watches in wonder while his uncle flails against the inevitable. No post on Sundays, Vernon bellows, trying to cling to the rules of his world as owls ignore them. The scene is both ridiculous and telling. The Dursleys would rather exhaust themselves fighting the impossible than admit that Harry belonged to another world, one they could never keep from him. Number 9. Dudley's phobias. Dudley Dursley was always portrayed as the bully, strutting behind his gang and taunting Harry. But in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, the Dementors strip away that mask. When the icy cold closes in on the alley, Dudley is left gasping, paralyzed by visions only he can see. Rowling writes that he was shaking uncontrollably, unable to speak. For the first time, the boy who had terrorized others is himself reduced to helplessness. The aftermath changes him. Dudley, once loud and arrogant, avoids the dark and refuses to talk about what happened. In the book, it is clear that he carries the memory of the Dementors like a scar. He knows they forced him to relive his worst self, his cruelty, his petty violence, the empty moments of his life. Unlike Harry, who had practice with fear, Dudley had never been tested, and the encounter shatters his sense of safety. This detail never reaches the films, but it matters. Dudley's phobia of the dark and his silence about magic show that the wizarding world did not simply pass by the Dursleys untouched. It frightened him, humbled him, and forced him to see his own reflection. That brief encounter revealed a side of Dudley that was vulnerable, and it explains why, later, he was capable of showing gratitude to the cousin he had always despised. Number 10. Their fear of Harry. The Dursleys spent years mocking Harry for being abnormal, yet the books reveal their secret fear of him. Vernon would roar, "No funny business," but his anger was laced with unease. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, when Harry accidentally inflated Aunt Marge like a balloon, Vernon's fury collapsed into panic. He didn't know how to control it. Harry hadn't even used a wand. The unpredictability of his magic terrified them more than the magic itself. Petunia's fear showed in smaller ways. When Harry mentioned the word Hogwarts or muttered about spells, she would snap, "Don't say that name in this house." But when she heard the word Dementor in Order of the Phoenix, her reaction betrayed her. She went pale and admitted she knew what it meant. Her fear wasn't just of Harry, it was of the world he belonged to, a world she couldn't shut out forever. For Dudley, the fear came later. After the Dementor attack in Order of the Phoenix, he no longer laughed at Harry's abilities. He avoided speaking of it, his bravado gone. In these moments, the books show a fascinating irony. The family that worked hardest to deny magic were also the ones most frightened by it. The films reduce this to annoyance, but on the page, the Dursleys live in a constant tension, despising Harry while trembling at the thought of what he could do. Number 11. Dudley's unexpected gratitude. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Dudley Dursley experiences something that changes him forever. When the Dementors attack him and Harry in Little Whinging, the spoiled bully who once laughed at Harry's misery, is reduced to a trembling wreck. Rowling describes him as pale, shaking and speechless, unable to process the terror he felt. For the first time, Dudley gets a glimpse of the darkness Harry has always faced. The aftermath is awkward, but revealing. Harry saves Dudley's life with the Patronus charm, an act of selflessness that goes against years of bullying and cruelty. Petunia and Vernon refuse to acknowledge it, insisting Harry is the source of trouble. But Dudley cannot ignore what happened. He sits in silence, unable to look at Harry, as though wrestling with gratitude he doesn't know how to express. His silence says more than words, hinting at a shift in the way he sees his cousin. Later, Rowling gives readers a rare moment of honesty. As the Dursleys prepare to leave their home in Deathly Hallows, Dudley finally speaks. He tells Harry, "I don't think you're a waste of space. It is clumsy and blunt, but it is sincere." Coming from Dudley, who once counted Harry's suffering as entertainment, the sentence carries unexpected weight. For Harry, it is shocking. For readers, it is moving. The films never show this transformation. On screen, Dudley remains only a caricature of greed and bullying, but in the books, Rowling gives him depth, a sliver of humanity. The boy who once taunted Harry grew enough to recognize that his cousin's life mattered. That small act of gratitude does not erase years of cruelty, but it gives readers a glimpse of redemption. Dudley was capable of change, and Harry finally received something he never thought possible, a thank you. Number 12. The final farewell. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the Dursleys' departure from Privet Drive is written with a weight that the films never show. The house is no longer safe, and members of the Order of the Phoenix arrive to escort them into hiding. Vernon blusters. Petunia is tight-lipped, but it is Dudley who surprises everyone. For the first time, he looks at Harry not as a burden, but as someone worth worrying about. Rowling describes him shifting uncomfortably, then blurting out, "I don't think you're a waste of space." Those words land harder than any insult he had ever thrown. Harry is stunned into silence. Dudley, who once counted how many birthday presents he received and mocked Harry's cupboard, now feels compelled to show gratitude. It is clumsy, but real. The boy who had once been his tormentor reaches out, and the moment transforms them both. Dudley even shakes Harry's hand, a gesture so ordinary it feels extraordinary in this context. Petunia lingers too. Rowling notes how she pauses at the doorway as though she wants to speak but cannot. She looks at Harry with an expression that suggests fear, regret, and perhaps something like love buried under years of denial. For a second, she is not the sharp-tongued aunt, but the sister of Lily Evans, torn between two worlds. She says nothing, and then she is gone. That silence carries more meaning than words ever could. The films chose to cut this farewell, robbing audiences of one of the rare moments where the Dursleys show depth. Without it, the family remains flat caricatures of cruelty. But in the book, this goodbye shows that people can change even a little, and that small gestures, an awkward handshake, a hesitant glance, can carry the weight of forgiveness. It is bittersweet, brief, and unforgettable, reminding us that even in Harry's darkest hour, light could come from the unlikeliest of places. Number 13. Cruel punishments for magic. The Dursleys treated any mention of magic as if Harry had committed a crime. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, when Dobby dropped the pudding in the living room, Vernon's fury exploded. "You've ruined my idyll," he shouted, before locking Harry in his bedroom and fitting bars to the window. For 3 days, Harry was given almost nothing to eat, 2 slices of bread and some cheese, as though starvation could cure the shame of magic. It was not just punishment. It was their attempt to erase his very identity. The cupboard under the stairs became another weapon of control. In Philosopher's Stone, before Harry even knew he was a wizard, Vernon used isolation as his answer to anything unusual. When Harry made the glass at the zoo vanish, sending Dudley into the snake enclosure, the punishment was swift. "Back to the cupboard! No meals for a week!" Vernon bellowed. These moments revealed the brutal imbalance in their household. Dudley's accidents were excused, Harry's accidents were condemned as wicked. Petunia's punishments were quieter but no less cruel. She might hand Harry a list of chores stretching from morning to night, making him scrub pans or weed the garden as penance for a word like Hogwarts. Her voice was sharp. "No nonsense in this house." To Petunia, every spark of magic was an insult, a reminder that she could never belong to her sister's world. Through her punishments, she tried to smother not just behavior, but possibility. For Vernon, each act of discipline was about control. He could not stop Hogwarts from sending letters, nor owls from delivering messages, but he could slam Harry against the wall and thunder, "There will be no more funny business." In those moments, the reader sees a man fighting shadows, punishing a child for something he could never change. The films soften this cruelty, but the books make it plain. The Dursleys did not simply dislike magic, they treated it as a threat to their existence, and they punished Harry as if he carried the weapon himself. Number 14. Obsession with normality. Vernon Dursley wanted nothing more than to be normal. He liked his drills, his tidy lawn, and his predictable neighbours on Privet Drive. Anything unusual filled him with rage. When letters for Harry began arriving in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Vernon panicked. He nailed the mail slot shut, burned the envelopes, and even dragged his family to a shack on a rock in the sea just to escape the unnatural. "No post on Sundays," he shouted triumphantly, as if ordinary rules could stop magic. His obsession with normality turned into madness. Petunia Dursley shared that obsession, though hers carried a sharper edge. She had once envied her sister Lily for being chosen by Hogwarts. Denied entry herself, she buried her bitterness by clinging to an immaculate house and a perfectly respectable life. She would gossip with neighbours, polish the kitchen counters, and boast of Dudley's achievements at school. When Harry accidentally made his hair grow back overnight, Petunia shrieked, "You look just like your father." The insult was less about James than about what Harry represented, the world she had worked so hard to erase from her life. For Dudley, normality meant indulgence. His parents gave him everything. 20 presents for his birthday weren't enough, and he cried when the count was less than the year before. Harry, by contrast, wore Dudley's oversized hand-me-downs and lived in the cupboard under the stairs. "I'll be in my bedroom, making no noise and pretending I don't exist," Harry muttered bitterly in the Chamber of Secrets. Dudley's excess and Harry's deprivation were the Dursleys' way of drawing a thick line between their real son and the boy who threatened their picture of normal family life. This desperate love of normality made Harry a walking nightmare to them. He was proof that their world was not safe, not ordinary, and not under their control. The more Harry grew into his identity as a wizard, the more desperate the Dursleys became to suppress him. They locked away his schoolbooks, silenced his owl, and shouted, "No magic in this house," as if words alone could undo who he was. In truth, Harry's very presence exposed the fragility of their carefully constructed image. That fear, more than cruelty, explains the depth of their hatred. Number 15, the Dursleys' neighbours. The neat rows of houses on Privet Drive hid a truth that films chose to overlook: the Dursleys' constant fear of their neighbours. Vernon and Petunia were not simply raising their son Dudley and tolerating Harry under their roof. They were building a fortress of appearances, a daily performance meant to convince the people around them that nothing unusual ever happened. In number 4. In the books, J.K. Rowling gave us subtle glimpses of this theatre, describing how the Dursleys invented elaborate stories about Harry's life, all tailored for the ears of their neighbours. In their world, the greatest danger was not a dark wizard, but the possibility that Mrs. Polkiss might see something strange through her curtains. Petunia Dursley's obsession with normality was sharpened by her constant awareness of who might be watching. On Privet Drive, the hedge lines were immaculate, the lawns perfectly trimmed, and the smallest rumour could spread in minutes. Petunia knew this, and her performance as the perfect housewife and mother relied on concealing every trace of Harry's existence. To the neighbours, Dudley was the star child adored and celebrated. Harry, meanwhile, had to be explained away. In Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, we learn that the Dursleys told everyone Harry attended St. Brutus's secure centre for incurably criminal boys. That phrase alone reveals more about their values than any amount of dialogue could. They preferred their neighbours to think Harry was dangerous rather than magical. The presence of neighbours like Mrs. Polkiss made this charade essential. The Polkiss family, with their daughter Piers, were often mentioned in passing. Piers was Dudley's closest companion, the boy who tagged along during Harry's torment in the park. But Mrs. Polkiss represented something larger, the community gaze that held the Dursleys hostage. If Vernon ever feared an owl might swoop in front of the wrong person's window, it was because the Polkiss family was there to see it. The films stripped away this dimension, removing the subtle but powerful tension of a family who cared more about suburban gossip than about a boy's dignity. Another important figure was Mrs. Arabella Figg, who lived only a few doors down. In the films, she makes her appearance in Order of the Phoenix, portrayed as a slightly eccentric, cat-loving neighbour. But the books painted a deeper picture of how she was integrated into the Dursleys' strategy of concealment. Petunia frequently forced Harry to spend time with Mrs. Figg, not because she was kind, but because it solved the problem of what to do with him when the Dursleys wanted to indulge Dudley. Harry recalled that these visits were long hours of looking at photographs of cats, a punishment disguised as babysitting. For the Dursleys, however, Mrs. Figg was also useful as a piece of neighbourhood theatre. She allowed Petunia to claim that she gave Harry outings, proving she was not a neglectful guardian. What Petunia never guessed was that Mrs. Figg was part of Dumbledore's network, a squib keeping watch over Harry. In many ways, the Dursleys' cruelty was magnified by this obsession with appearances. They starved Harry of affection not only behind closed doors, but also in the narratives they spun to neighbours. A striking passage comes in Goblet of Fire, where Rowling notes the Dursleys had never exactly been proud of Harry. Instead, they invented tales that painted him as a delinquent. Vernon even enjoyed suggesting to colleagues that Harry was a source of constant trouble. To admit to magic would have destroyed their carefully crafted facade. For them, the nightmare scenario was not a Death Eater on the doorstep, but Mrs. Polkiss whispering to Mrs. Number 8 that the Dursleys were harbouring something strange. The films rarely lingered on the front lawns of Privet Drive, yet in the books those hedges and gardens symbolised the boundaries of secrecy. Consider the scene in Chamber of Secrets where Dobby drops Aunt Petunia's pudding in front of the visiting Masons. Petunia's horror is not only about ruined dessert, it is about the fact that neighbours might notice something odd in the commotion. She had spent hours preparing for this dinner, rehearsing Dudley's polite remarks, all because she wanted to impress Mr. and Mrs. Mason, business connections who mirrored the Dursleys' own values of wealth and reputation. That entire episode loses its sharpness in the film adaptation because the tension with the neighbours, the constant performance, is gone. There is something profoundly revealing in the way Petunia reacted to Harry's magical world. She often said she despised her sister Lily, but part of that bitterness came from jealousy. Petunia had chosen a life of conventional perfection, a safe marriage, a well-kept home, and neighbours who admired her flowers. Harry's very existence was a threat to that choice because he reminded her that magic existed and that she had been excluded from it. To preserve her illusion, she needed her neighbours to see Harry not as special, but as flawed, hence the invented stories of delinquency and spoiled behaviour. It was easier for the neighbours to believe Harry was difficult than to confront anything extraordinary. The irony is that Harry's world often spilled over into the neighbourhood despite the Dursleys' efforts. In Prisoner of Azkaban, when Aunt Marge inflated like a balloon, the panic was not only about containing her, it was about ensuring no neighbour glanced over the hedge to see her floating away. Rowling wrote, 2 houses away, a curtain was twitching. That small observation crystallises the Dursleys' fear. Someone was always watching. The neighbours were silent judges, never speaking in the narrative but always present, shaping how Petunia and Vernon behaved. The films erased this background chorus, leaving the Dursleys' cruelty to seem like private sadism rather than the desperate maintenance of a public mask. Number 16. Refusal to help even in small things. Harry Potter's life with the Dursleys is remembered by many readers as a blur of neglect, cruelty, and endless chores. But one of the most telling elements that the films only grazed over was the subtle and persistent refusal of Petunia, Vernon, and Dudley to grant him even the smallest kindness. In J.K. Rowling's books, these moments pile up like drops of acid, corroding Harry's sense of belonging and reinforcing the message that he was, in their eyes, nobody. It wasn't about dramatic acts of cruelty alone. The truth lies in the small humiliations, the quiet demands that revealed a family unwilling to treat him with the barest respect or decency. The movies flashed these details in passing, but the novels built entire atmospheres. From them reminding readers that Harry grew up in a house where love was systematically withheld. From the very first chapter of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, the foundation of this disdain is established. Petunia Dursley is not just indifferent to her nephew, she is quick to view him as a tool for housework, someone who can and should be assigned the thankless tasks that nobody else in the family would stoop to perform. Harry is described as small and underfed, dressed in Dudley's oversized hand-me-downs, yet that never stopped Petunia from forcing him into responsibilities far beyond his age. Early in the book, readers see Harry standing on a stool frying eggs for the family breakfast, while Dudley counts his birthday presents. This image lingers in the mind because of its imbalance, a child made servant, while another child luxuriates in gifts. The film nods to this scene, but only briefly, and in doing so misses the deeper meaning, the normalization of Harry's servitude in the Dursley household. One of the clearest examples of this petty cruelty comes in The Chamber of Secrets, where Rowling writes, "Harry was used to spiders because the cupboard under the stairs was full of them, and that was where he slept." This detail, haunting in its simplicity, is tied directly to how the Dursleys viewed him as undeserving of comfort. Sleeping in a cupboard is not just a matter of space, it is a symbolic declaration that he is beneath notice. When Harry is eventually moved to Dudley's second bedroom, it is not out of concern, but because the Dursleys fear the consequences of neglect becoming too visible to outsiders. The films highlight the cupboard, but they fail to linger on the everyday meaning of such a life. Harry being expected to emerge from that cramped space every morning, ready to cook, clean, and endure Dudley's sneers. In the novels, Harry's chores extend far beyond breakfast. Petunia, with her sharp eye for appearances, was obsessed with maintaining a perfect home and garden. Naturally, she delegated this to Harry. Rowling recounts a summer day when Harry was ordered to paint the garden bench, prune the roses, and mow the lawn under the scorching sun, while Vernon relaxed with a newspaper and Dudley slurped down ice cream. The juxtaposition is brutal. Harry, sweaty and exhausted, doing work that should never have been left to a 12-year-old, while his cousin gloated over being free of responsibility. The films might have shown him occasionally pushing a lawnmower, but they never communicated the relentless rhythm of these humiliations, the constant reminder that he was never allowed to simply be a child. The small cruelties carried emotional weight because they were deliberate reminders of his status. When Dudley spilled something, Harry was expected to clean it. When Vernon demanded tea, Harry was the one to fetch it. When Petunia felt the curtains needed washing, Harry was given the task. These were not rare punishments, but daily expectations. Rowling makes this explicit in The Philosopher's Stone, where Harry reflects that he was used to all the chores by now because the Dursleys never lifted a finger themselves if they could get Harry to do it. The point is not merely the workload, but the hierarchy. Every order reinforced that Harry was positioned below even the laziest family member. One of the most chilling details comes during Dudley's birthday at the zoo. In the film, the moment is presented with a certain humour. Dudley tapping the glass, Harry unintentionally freeing the snake, but the novel is sharper in its cruelty. Before they even leave, Petunia commands Harry to stay out of the way and don't you dare do anything funny. reminding him that his very presence is treated as contamination. Worse still, Harry is only taken along because Mrs. Figg, his usual babysitter, breaks her leg. He's never considered worthy of inclusion. His role, even on a family outing, is to remain silent, unnoticed, and obedient. The underlying message is devastating. He is not part of them, only tolerated as a burden, the lack of generosity extended to the smallest pleasures. Readers never forget the moment in the Chamber of Secrets when Petunia places a plate of fruitcake on the counter, meant for the guests, and glares at Harry to ensure he does not touch a crumb, or the way Dudley's diet is enforced by denying Harry meals, as if his needs could be measured only against his cousins. When Vernon announces that Dudley is on a diet, Petunia hands Harry a single grapefruit for breakfast, and Rowling describes Harry as feeling hungrier than he had ever felt in his life. These details sting because they show that the Dursleys did not even allow him to share in the smallest indulgence or the most basic human comfort. Number 17, hatred toward Harry's friends. Harry's years at Privet Drive were defined not only by the bars on his window or the letters burned in the fireplace, but also by the unspoken hostility the Dursleys extended toward anyone connected to him. What the films reduced to occasional glares and awkward silences was, in the books, a constant undercurrent of contempt. Uncle Vernon, Aunt Petunia, and even Dudley found ways to express their disdain for the people who cared about Harry. They did not merely dislike him as a boy, they hated the community he belonged to. That hatred flared most strongly whenever Ron Weasley or Hermione Granger appeared in their lives, bringing a piece of Harry's true world into the carefully polished normality of Privet Drive. The first clear sign of this animosity came when Harry received letters from his friends at the start of Chamber of Secrets. Uncle Vernon, spying the bright envelope addressed in emerald green ink, knew instantly that such correspondence threatened his grip on control. In the book it is described that Vernon roared, "Who be writing to you?" His voice dripped with suspicion, and once he learned it came from Ron, a boy from a family of wizards, his rage doubled. He tore the letter away, treating it as though it carried contamination. The film showed Vernon's obsession with controlling Harry's letters, but they skipped the crucial detail that these letters came from Ron and Hermione, whom Vernon specifically despised for being gateways into a world he loathed. Ron, in particular, became a target of Vernon's sneers. The Weasleys embodied everything the Dursleys rejected. They were poor, openly magical, and proud of their large family. To Vernon, who prided himself on order, material comfort, and the illusion of superiority, the Weasleys were nothing but a clan of savages. Rowling describes Vernon's disdain in Goblet of Fire, when Mr. Weasley arrives at Privet Drive to collect Harry. Vernon's face turned purple as he spat out his contempt, finding the Weasley children unbearable. The house filled with tension as Vernon tried to keep his veneer of civility, but his disgust seeped through every word and glare. In that scene, he deliberately refused to shake Mr. Weasley's hand, proving how deep his hatred ran, not just against Harry, but against Harry's chosen family. Hermione fared no better in their eyes. If Ron symbolized poverty and unruly magic, Hermione represented intellect and strangeness. Petunia, who worshipped suburban perfection and polished appearances, could not tolerate the sight of a girl so different from her own son. Hermione's bushy hair, her relentless curiosity, her eagerness to help Harry, all these qualities would have been unthinkable in the Dursley household. In Prisoner of Azkaban, when Harry received gifts from Hermione during the summer, Vernon looked at them with visible disgust, muttering about that odd girl. Petunia in particular scowled at the very mention of Hermione's name, as though intellectual ambition itself was a disease that could spread to Dudley if left unchecked. What the films condensed into silent scorn was, in the books, vivid animosity expressed in words and actions. In Order of the Phoenix, when Harry's friends attempted to contact him, the Dursleys bristled with resentment. Petunia shrieked about the abnormal letters. Vernon fumed about those people. and Dudley mimicked Harry by laughing at the strange names. Their reaction to Harry's friends was not passive, it was aggressive, loud, and meant to wound. Every arrival of an owl was treated as an invasion, a reminder that Harry had allies and that he was never as isolated as the Dursleys wished. The height of their hatred came during the disastrous meeting in Goblet of Fire, when Fred and George accidentally set off Tun-Tung toffees in the Dursley living room. Dudley suffered an enormous swollen tongue, and while the incident was played with comedic flair, it revealed something darker. Vernon's fury was not only about Dudley's condition, it was about the humiliation of having those people inside his pristine home. He saw the Weasley twins not as mischievous boys, but as representatives of everything wrong with Harry's world. His bellowing threats, his refusal to treat them with courtesy, exposed a man whose prejudice ran so deep he could not see beyond his hatred. Aunt Petunia's contempt, though quieter, carried its own sharp edge. Her treatment of Harry's friends was coloured by the shadow of her sister Lily. Seeing Ron, Hermione, or even Hagrid reminded her of the world she had been excluded from. When Dudley repeated cruel remarks Vernon made about Harry's companions, Petunia never corrected him. Instead, she encouraged the belief that association with Harry's friends made him dangerous and inferior. In Chamber of Secrets, when the Weasleys arrived in their flying car to rescue Harry, Petunia's shrieks filled the air as she clutched at her ruined kitchen. Her words carried venom, spitting curses not just at Harry, but at the Weasley family themselves, whom she described as reckless and filthy. The Dursleys' hostility toward Hermione carried an undercurrent of jealousy as well. Though she was a Muggle-born, her brilliance and magical abilities placed her far above their carefully cultivated image of normalcy. For Petunia, who had grown up in Lily's shadow, Hermione was a painful reminder that even non-magical parents could produce a child of extraordinary power. In Prisoner of Azkaban, when Harry mentioned Hermione's academic success, Vernon sneered about that strange girl, in a tone filled with both mockery and fear. The disdain they showed for her was rooted in their inability to control her narrative, just as they failed to control Harry's. Number 18, Harry as a servant in the family. Harry Potter's childhood inside Number 4, Privet Drive, is often remembered through the lenses of the films where Dudley's whining, Vernon's shouting, and Petunia's disapproving glances dominate the scenes. Yet what most viewers fail to realize is that the cinematic version of this childhood was heavily softened. In the books, J.K. Rowling crafted a picture of deliberate neglect and calculated humiliation, where Harry was not merely an unwanted nephew, but was treated as though he were the family's servant. This darker truth is not a matter of interpretation, but of explicit detail. Harry was ordered to cook, to clean, to iron, and to labour in the garden from an age when most children are still learning their multiplication tables. The films reduce this experience to a single breakfast scene, but the novels unveil an ongoing cycle of servitude that defined his life in the Dursley household. Petunia Dursley's role in this dynamic cannot be overstated. She was not simply a cold aunt, she was the orchestrator of Harry's endless chores. Rowling writes in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Harry was used to a hard diet and plenty of exercise because the Dursleys were quite happy to give him all the work they could think of. These words alone unravel the softened picture left by the films. Petunia deliberately ensured that her nephew's existence was filled with cleaning ovens, scrubbing floors, and mowing the lawn under the burning sun. Such tasks were not framed as household contributions, but as punishments. As reminders that he was different, unwanted, and perpetually inferior to Dudley. In cinematic shorthand, this became a momentary visual gag. In the novels, it was a way of life. Take, for example, Harry's 10th birthday summer, when the Dursleys were preparing for a dinner with the Masons. In the film, we see a comically brief montage. Petunia fusses over the pudding, Vernon boasts about his business, and Dudley is indulged. But the book reveals the true extent of Harry's expected labour. Petunia ordered him to wash the car, prune the roses, and clean the windows. Rowling describes him weeding the flower beds in the sweltering heat, watched by Dudley and his gang as though he were an amusing spectacle. Here was no light-hearted family quarrel, but the quiet, insidious reality of a boy. Reduced to the role of domestic help, stripped of the carefree days that a child deserves. That detail was left behind in the transition to film. The most striking evidence of Harry's role as a servant comes in the small daily routines carefully documented in the novels. Breakfast was not merely a one-off task, it was a recurring obligation. Rowling writes in The Philosopher's Stone, Harry was frying eggs and bacon while Dudley was counting his presents. In that moment, the symbolism is stark. One child stands before a mountain of gifts, the other bends over a frying pan, sweating over food he will barely be allowed to touch. The films chose to show Dudley counting gifts but reduced Harry's contribution to a quick visual, missing the layered cruelty of a boy forced to labor for the very people who despised him. Nor was Harry's servitude confined to the kitchen. The laundry basket, heavy and endless, was his responsibility. Rowling makes clear that Harry was often told to wash and iron Dudley's smeltings uniform, an image that strips away any illusion of normal family life. Imagine a boy, undersized and underfed, handling the stiff orange knickerbockers and knobbly hats of his cousin's school clothes, while Petunia praised Dudley for his appearance. This was not household fairness, it was symbolic domination. The boy, who should have been wearing a decent school uniform of his own, was instead assigned to care for his cousins. It is a detail never visualized in the films, and yet it paints a fuller portrait of Harry's early life. The garden, too, became a stage for Harry's servitude. In the Chamber of Secrets, Rowling recounts how Harry spent much of his summer pruning, mowing and watering under Petunia's orders. His every effort was monitored, not for quality, but for the opportunity to scold. Any missed weed or uneven patch of lawn became grounds for punishment. Dudley would lounge nearby, sipping sodas and jeering at Harry's sweaty labor. Such a scenario, stripped of context, might seem like ordinary sibling rivalry, but it was instead a calculated humiliation, designed to emphasize Dudley's comfort against Harry's toil. The films, eager for lighter pacing, chose not to capture these hours of drudgery, and in doing so they dulled the sharp edges of Petunia's cruelty. What makes this detail particularly haunting is the deliberate nature of the arrangement. Rowling never suggests that the Dursleys were overwhelmed with housework, or that Harry was simply helping. Instead, his chores are presented as a constant reminder that he was an outsider. In The Philosopher's Stone, it is explicitly stated that Harry was treated as though he were something dirty that had to be kept away. His cupboard under the stairs was not just a bedroom. It was the symbolic headquarters of his servitude, a place where the tools of cleaning and labor were stored alongside the boy himself. The imagery is devastating once considered fully. He lived among brooms and mops because that was the role assigned to him, a child treated not as family, but as part of the household's maintenance. The injustice is amplified when contrasted with Dudley's treatment. While Harry cleaned, Dudley was entertained. While Harry mowed the lawn, Dudley played video games. When Harry was denied food as punishment, Dudley's plate was piled high. The films showed Dudley as spoiled and greedy, but they did not explore how his privilege was sustained by Harry's forced labor. Rowling's novels repeatedly draw this contrast, ensuring that readers understood the depth of the imbalance. The boy who was prophesied to defeat Voldemort was, for a decade, first reduced to serving eggs and bacon to a cousin whose biggest worry was whether he had 37 or 38 birthday presents. The emotional damage of such a childhood cannot be overlooked. By framing Harry as a servant, Petunia instilled in him a constant sense of unworthiness. He entered Hogwarts not only underfed and underloved, but with the ingrained belief that his needs were secondary to everyone else's. When Ron Weasley welcomed him into the burrow and Molly fussed over his meals, Harry's shock was not simply about generosity, it was about experiencing family life for the first time. The films capture his awe, But without the full weight of his servitude under the Dursleys, the moment loses much of its poignancy. Only when one remembers Harry washing Dudley's socks and scrubbing Petunia's pans does the kindness of Molly Weasley shine in its intended contrast. Another overlooked moment comes in The Prisoner of Azkaban when Aunt Marge visits. Harry is ordered to serve drinks and clear plates while Dudley sits comfortably beside her. The command is delivered not out of necessity but out of habit. Harry is the servant, Dudley is the son. That division had become so ingrained that even visiting relatives understood it. Petunia did not hide it, nor did Vernon. The boy in their care was to labour while their own son was to be celebrated. The film shows Marge's cruel comments and Harry's anger, but not the small humiliations that build into an eruption. Rowling's text ensures that readers understood the daily indignities leading up to that explosive moment. The absence of these details in the films alters the perception of the Dursleys. On screen, they appear exaggerated, almost comedic, a grotesque but tolerable family whose cruelty is softened by humour. On the page, however, they are revealed as abusers. The distinction matters. By erasing Harry's servitude, the films suggest that his childhood was unpleasant but survivable. The books insist it was damaging, a crucible of suffering that shaped him into the boy who longed desperately for acceptance at Hogwarts. Without the weight of his endless chores, viewers are left with a Harry who is unlucky. Readers know him as a boy who was enslaved within his own family. This erasure also dilutes the symbolism of Harry's eventual triumph. The boy who lived did not only rise above Voldemort's curse, he rose above the suffocating cruelty of Number 4, Privet Drive. His survival was not just magical, it was emotional and psychological. To stand in the Great Hall and be chosen by the Sorting Hat, to find friends in Ron and Hermione, to be offered food at the feasts, these were victories against the shadow of servitude. Each moment was a rejection of the Dursleys' attempt to keep him small, dirty, and subservient. Without the full extent of his laborious childhood, the triumph is dimmed on screen, leaving audiences with only half the story. Harry's role as a servant also resonates with deeper themes of the series. The books consistently explore power, control, and the ways in which individuals resist oppression. The Dursleys' treatment of Harry is a microcosm of the larger conflicts to come. Just as Voldemort sought to dominate, the Dursleys sought to diminish. Just as Hogwarts offered Harry freedom, so too did the wizarding world give him the chance to break free of servitude. The films, by glossing over his early chores, miss this symbolic resonance. Yet the novels remind readers again and again that Harry's destiny as a leader was forged in the fires of indignity. Perhaps the most haunting image is the simplicity of it all. A boy, barefoot on a kitchen floor, frying eggs for people who hate him. A child, too small for his cousin's hand-me-downs, scrubbing dirt from Dudley's shoes. A garden filled with roses that he watered but was never allowed to touch. These are not fantastical images of magic and mystery. They are all too ordinary, and that is what makes them chilling. Harry's life as a servant is the quiet tragedy the films refuse to explore, but one that lingers in every page of the books. It is the fact about the Dursleys that remains hidden behind the screen, waiting for readers to uncover the full truth. Number 19. Fear of magical objects. When Harry Potter returned to Privet Drive after his first year at Hogwarts, the excitement of the magical world was quickly replaced by the suffocating tension of the Dursley household. The films briefly hint at their dislike of his school life, but they gloss over a darker truth revealed in the books, the Dursleys' absolute fear and loathing of magical objects. This was not simply irritation at Harry being different, it was closer to paranoia. His wand, his spellbooks, even his cauldron seemed to them like ticking bombs hidden under their roof. For Vernon, Petunia, and Dudley, each item represented an invasion of something unnatural, a reminder that their carefully maintained illusion of normality was fragile and easily shattered. Rowling paints this vividly in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, when Harry arrives home with his school trunk filled with magical textbooks, quills, and his cauldron. The Dursleys order him to keep everything hidden away, as though the mere sight of a spellbook could contaminate their home. Vernon snarls at Harry not to bring that lot into sight, while Petunia hovers nervously, as if she expects sparks to leap out of the pages at any moment. The panic was not dramatized in the films, where the trunk and Hedwig's cage are treated as background props rather than focal points of conflict. Yet in the novels, the very presence of these objects provokes constant friction and deepens the sense of Harry's isolation. The Dursleys' hostility extended most cruelly to Hedwig. The snowy owl, a gift from Hagrid and Harry's only reliable companion in the Muggle world, was locked in her cage for weeks. Petunia and Vernon would forbid Harry from letting her out, terrified of what the neighbours might say if they saw an owl flying around Surrey. But their fear was more than suburban embarrassment. To them, Hedwig embodied the alienness of the magical world. In Chamber of Secrets, it is written that Uncle Vernon had locked Harry's owl inside her cage to stop her carrying messages to anyone in the wizarding world. This was not simply an inconvenience, it was the deliberate cutting of Harry's lifeline, the severing of his connection to a world the Dursleys desperately wished did not exist. Harry's wand was treated with particular suspicion. The books show us Vernon's eyes narrowing whenever he noticed it, as though the polished piece of holly and phoenix feather were a loaded weapon. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Harry even uses this perception to his advantage, subtly reminding Vernon that he has magical power. Harry had to exercise a lot of self-control to stop himself pointing his wand threateningly at Uncle Vernon. This tension reveals just how much the Dursleys feared the wand, far beyond what was shown on screen. The films downplay this detail, but the books make it clear that the Dursleys lived in dread of what Harry might unleash, even when he made no move to use magic at all. There is an almost comical moment in Goblet of Fire, when the Weasleys arrive through the fireplace to pick Harry up. For the Dursleys, the chaos of magical travel inside their prim living room was a nightmare realized. Their horror at the twins dropping sweets and Arthur poking curiously at their electric plugs captures the full scope of their anxiety. But beneath the humour lies a deeper truth. The Dursleys perceived magical objects as contamination. Every encounter with wands, cauldrons, or even enchanted sweets was treated as a threat to their way of life. The films capture the surface-level comedy of the Weasleys in the Dursley house, but they ignore the layers of fear that defined Vernon and Petunia's interactions with Harry's possessions. One of the starkest examples comes in Chamber of Secrets, when Dobby drops a pudding in the Dursleys' kitchen. Magic is not even performed by Harry, yet the Dursleys' reaction is hysteria. Uncle Vernon grips Harry and hisses about blowing up the house with his tricks, though Harry insists he did nothing. For Vernon, the magical world is not bound by rules or distinctions. The presence of magical items alone signals danger. This is why he demands Harry lock his school things away and even nails shut the cupboard under the stairs when he suspects Harry is hiding something. The fear of contamination drives him to extremes, and Rowling's narration underlines how suffocating this atmosphere is for Harry. Petunia's reactions carry their own weight. She, unlike Vernon, has a personal history with magic, having grown up in the shadow of her witch sister, Lily. In Philosopher's Stone, her rant to Harry reveals her lingering resentment. My perfect sister being who she was, my parents were so proud of having a witch in the family, they practically drowned in her. This bitterness explains her revulsion at magical objects. Each spellbook or wand reminded her not only of her sister, but also of her own rejection from the magical world. While the films present her mainly as a nagging figure, the books depict her compulsively scrubbing, tidying, and hiding away Harry's things as if she could erase Lily's existence by erasing Lily's son's possessions. The Dursleys' panic over magical objects reveals a fascinating irony. In their efforts to suppress magic, they gave it even more power in their household. The sight of a cauldron in the hallway or the sound of Hedwig's wings against her cage reduced them to nervous wrecks. This irony was crucial in shaping Harry's resilience. By trying to isolate him from his world, the Dursleys only highlighted how much that world mattered. In Order of the Phoenix, when Harry is forced to remain at Privet Drive, his school trunk becomes his symbol of identity, a chest filled with everything that connects him to his true self. The films show him with the trunk, but they fail to capture the intensity of the Dursleys' panic whenever that trunk creaked open. Rowling's descriptions of Vernon's behavior are particularly striking. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Vernon goes pale when he learns that Harry has permission to perform magic outside of school if necessary. The thought of Harry's wand inside the house makes him tremble. He was a violent shade of puce and looked as though he might burst. This fear, rooted in ignorance, was played mostly for laughs in the films. Yet in the books it illustrates a profound intolerance, the Dursleys' refusal to coexist with anything that challenged their worldview. Their fear of magical items was not rational. It was a manifestation of their deep-seated prejudice. This prejudice was inherited by Dudley, though in a different form. While he mocked Harry for being a freak, Dudley also recoiled from magical objects. In Goblet of Fire, he stares suspiciously at a toffee Fred Weasley drops, only to discover too late that it is enchanted. His panic when his tongue swells illustrates how little understanding the Dursleys had of magic and how their fear left them defenseless against even the most harmless prank. Dudley's behavior reinforced the idea that the Dursleys' household was a fortress of denial where every magical object was an invader. What the films miss most is how these interactions shaped Harry's growth. By living in a home where even his textbooks were treated as contraband, Harry learned the value of loyalty to his true identity. Each time Vernon demanded he hide his wand or locked Hedwig in her cage, Harry's attachment to the magical world deepened. The novels describe his longing as he gazes at his trunk, wishing he could open it and immerse himself in the life he truly belonged to. He had never felt so cut off from the wizarding world, Rowling writes in Chamber of Secrets. This emotional depth is crucial to understanding Harry's character, but it is absent from the film's lighter portrayal. The suppression of magical items also served as a narrative mirror. The Dursleys' treatment of Harry's possessions reflected their treatment of Harry himself. Just as they locked away his wand and hid his books, they tried to suppress his very identity. The magical objects symbolized everything they wished to deny: Harry's heritage, his connection to his parents, and his future. The fact that Harry clung to them, even in secret, underscores his resilience and his refusal to let the Dursleys define him. The films focus on physical mistreatment, Harry living in a cupboard, but they understate the symbolic violence of treating his belongings as dangerous contraband. The difference between book and film portrayal becomes striking when one considers tone. The movies, aiming for family-friendly entertainment, played the Dursleys as comic villains, Vernon blustering, Petunia shrieking, Dudley whining, but the novels present a more insidious cruelty. The Dursleys' fear of magical objects is not just funny, it is oppressive, isolating, and psychologically damaging. Harry grows up with the knowledge that the things that connect him to his parents are despised in his own home. This nuance makes the novel's world richer, reminding readers that prejudice often manifests not in grand acts of violence, but in small, relentless denials of someone's right to exist fully. By examining the Dursleys' fear of magical objects, one sees how Rowling weaves everyday intolerance into her story. The films, for all their spectacle, left this subtle layer unexplored. The books show us a boy surrounded not only by family hostility, but also by the constant suppression of the tools that symbolize who he is. Harry's wand, Hedwig, his textbooks, these are more than school supplies. They are tokens of identity, family, and belonging. And in the face of the Dursleys' paranoia, They become treasures Harry guards with all his heart. Number 20. Petunia knew more than she pretended. Petunia Dursley's character has always been painted in stark colours by the films, a woman who despises anything connected with magic, a narrow-minded aunt who regards her nephew Harry with cold disdain, and someone whose life revolves around keeping her family far away from abnormality. Yet in the books, J.K. Rowling quietly sprinkles details that reveal a far more complex portrait. Petunia is not simply ignorant of magic. She is not the clueless bystander that the films suggest. Instead, she is a woman who knows far more than she admits, who hides her understanding behind a wall of bitterness, and who once longed for a different kind of life. One of the most striking moments comes in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, when Harry, furious after encountering Dementors in Little Whinging, shouts about the attack. To his shock, Petunia responds with words no Muggle should have known. She says, "I heard that awful boy telling her about them years ago." The awful boy was clearly Severus Snape, who had been Lily's childhood friend. This detail immediately unsettles the reader. How could Petunia, who supposedly loathed magic and never paid attention to it, recall the name of a creature as specific as a Dementor? Her knowledge was not accidental. She had listened, remembered, and carried that understanding for decades. The films omit this moment entirely. In their streamlined narrative, Petunia remains an outsider, someone who simply shrieks at the mention of magic. But Rowling's choice to give her this knowledge changes the way we see her. It suggests that Petunia grew up in a house where magic was spoken of frequently, where Lily's letters from Hogwarts and her conversations with Snape spilled across the kitchen table. Petunia might have rolled her eyes, but she was listening. She might have claimed disgust, but she absorbed every word. This makes her rejection of Harry not the result of ignorance, but of deliberate denial, a coping mechanism to distance herself from a world she once wanted to join. For there is another key piece of canon often overlooked. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, when Dumbledore explains why Harry must stay with the Dursleys, he mentions the ancient magic of blood protection. By being in Petunia's home, Harry is shielded from Voldemort. Yet Petunia agrees to take Harry in, not entirely out of fear of Dumbledore's letter, but because she understands what it means. Later in Order of the Phoenix, Dumbledore sends her a howler after the Dementor attack. "Remember my last, Petunia?" The words freeze her into compliance. This moment is vital. It proves that she not only received Dumbledore's first letter on the night Lily died, but also comprehended its weight. She might have slammed the door on the wizarding world, but she respected or feared it enough to abide by its rules. This suggests a history deeper than a simple sibling rivalry. In the Philosopher's Stone, Petunia reveals during her rant to Harry that she remembers every detail of Lily's Hogwarts years. She says, "My perfect sister, being who she was, got a letter from that school and came home every holiday with her pockets full of frog spawn, turning teacups into rats." This is not the memory of someone who was indifferent. It is the memory of someone who noticed everything, who catalogued each spell, who resented but also marveled. The bitterness in her words comes not from ignorance but from familiarity. She watched Lily live a life she could not touch, and it burned her. In fact, Petunia's own desire to be part of the magical world is confirmed in Rowling's later revelations. As a child, she wrote to Dumbledore, asking if she too could attend Hogwarts. He replied kindly, but truthfully, that she was not magical. This rejection hardened into jealousy. The books never directly quote this exchange, but Rowling explained it in interviews, and its implications bleed into every scene with Harry. Petunia's scorn is not the result of never knowing magic. It is the result of knowing it intimately, but being denied it personally. Every time she looked at Harry, she saw the life she wished she could have lived, and she punished him for being the reminder. The Dementor moment is especially significant because it connects Petunia not only to Lily, but to the dark undercurrents of the magical world. Dementors are not casual trivia. They are creatures feared even by seasoned wizards. For Petunia to remember them shows how deeply she internalized Lily's conversations. It also reveals her sharp mind, one that chooses carefully what to expose. She rarely lets her knowledge slip, but when she does, it unveils the truth. Petunia was never as detached as she pretended. The films erase this complexity, showing only a caricature, but the books insist that she lived with an unspoken awareness. Another striking example of her hidden knowledge comes in Deathly Hallows during the short but poignant farewell between her and Harry. She almost speaks, almost reveals the depth of what Lily's death meant to her, but she cannot bring herself to do it. The line reads, "She stopped and looked back. For a moment, Harry had the strangest feeling she wanted to say something. She gave him an odd, tremulous look and then bustled out after her husband and son." This moment gains new meaning when we remember her knowledge of the blood protection and the Dementors. She wanted to say something, perhaps to admit that she understood far more than Harry realized, but years of repression silenced her. The decision to hide this side of Petunia in the films diminishes the Dursleys' role in Harry's life. Instead of presenting her as a woman torn between knowledge and resentment, the movies show her only as cruel. But Rowling's Petunia embodies tragedy. She is a non-magical woman who once yearned for magic, who was surrounded by it, who understood it more than most muggles ever could, yet who had to bury that awareness beneath a facade of disdain. Her cruelty becomes a shield, a way to protect herself from the grief of being left out. The implications stretch further. If Petunia knew of Dementors, if she understood blood magic, if she remembered every holiday spell Lily performed, then her treatment of Harry gains new weight. She was not punishing an ignorant child for something she could not comprehend. She was punishing him for reminding her of what she had lost. This makes her role in Harry's upbringing more complex and more tragic. It was not stupidity but envy that fueled her coldness. She despised what she understood too well. Rowling uses subtle details to remind us of this. In Order of the Phoenix, Petunia's white face and trembling lips after the howler proved that she recognized the voice of authority in Dumbledore. She did not need explanation. She knew instantly what the message meant. In contrast, Vernon Dursley remained blustering and confused. This juxtaposition highlights the hidden layers in Petunia's character. She was never confused. She was complicit in a silent contract between herself and the magical world. Even her relationship with Dudley reflects this awareness. Dudley's sudden protection of Harry after the Dementor attack shocks his parents, but Petunia, though horrified, does not protest as fiercely as Vernon. Perhaps she realized that Dudley's encounter with magic had opened his eyes, just as hers had long ago, though she spent her life trying to shut them again. This parallel shows how Rowling threads subtle echoes into the story. Dudley accepts what Petunia never could. By stripping away these layers, the films turn Petunia into a figure of mockery. But the books give her tragic depth. She knew the names, the laws, the dangers. She had once begged to be part of it all. And though she locked that knowledge away, it surfaced in rare moments when the facade cracked. The resentment, the jealousy, the unspoken grief, they were all part of her silence. She was not ignorant. She was in many ways too informed, and it broke her spirit. The great irony is that Petunia's knowledge saved Harry. By accepting him into her home under the conditions of Dumbledore's letter, she created the protective barrier that kept him safe for years. She may have despised him, she may have treated him with cruelty, but she understood the necessity. Her compliance was not blind, it was rooted in the memory of Lily, in the knowledge of what the wizarding world could do, and in the authority of the man who had once written to her personally. Harry survived not because of her ignorance, but because of her unwilling acknowledgement of truth. This is the Petunia that the films chose to leave behind, not a shrill caricature, but a layered woman torn between envy and duty, knowledge and denial. She knew more than she ever let on, and that knowledge haunted her for life. The Dementor slip, the blood protection, the trembling look in Deathly Hallows, they tell a story the camera never showed. And perhaps that is fitting, because Petunia's life was one long performance, hiding the truth of how much she really knew. Number 21, the scene with Petunia's letter from Dumbledore. In J.K. Rowling's fifth book, Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, there is a moment so subtle, yet so defining, that it reshapes the way one sees Petunia Dursley. It is a passage almost invisible to readers on their first encounter, yet, on a second glance, it reverberates with unspoken pain. When Harry receives the howler from Albus Dumbledore, warning Petunia about the importance of keeping Harry in her home, her reaction is not one of confusion or defiance, as her husband and son would expect. Instead, she goes pale and admits, in a trembling whisper, that she remembers the letter. That small revelation changes everything. Petunia had always known more than she let on, and the safety Harry enjoyed at Privet Drive was not mere chance or legal guardianship. It was bound by blood, magic, and the remnants of a sisterly bond broken by jealousy, fear, and grief. The films, however, excised this layer of depth entirely. On screen, Petunia appears as a cardboard cutout of suburban cruelty, a woman who despises her nephew simply because he does not fit into her neat, carefully constructed life. She is shown fretting over appearances, cleaning counters with obsessive precision, and treating Harry like an intruder in her spotless home. What viewers never see is the trace of memory that weighs on her conscience, the weight of a promise that Dumbledore once laid upon her doorstep in the form of a baby and a letter. In the cinematic version, the complexities of Petunia's choices are lost, replaced by the easy villainy of a bitter aunt. The book itself makes the significance of the letter clear. In Chapter 2 of Order of the Phoenix, after Harry's disastrous encounter with the Dementors in Little Whinging, an argument explodes within the Dursley household. Uncle Vernon, red-faced and furious, demands to know why they should keep such a boy under their roof, especially now that trouble seems to follow him at every turn. Harry expects to be thrown out, cast into the streets, and even imagines what it might be like to leave the place he has long considered a prison. But then the howler arrives. Dumbledore's voice, amplified and terrifying, speaks directly to Petunia. "Remember my last, Petunia." The words strike her like a ghostly hand on her shoulder. Her face changes, her protest dies on her lips. Vernon splutters, unable to comprehend, but Petunia makes the decision. Harry stays. That decision is not born of love or affection, but of duty, memory, and a very real fear of the consequences of disobedience. This scene in the book reveals Petunia's hidden layers. For all her disdain toward Lily's world, she is still tied to it inescapably. She once longed to be part of it herself, writing to Dumbledore as a child and begging to attend Hogwarts. She was denied, left outside the magical world, and that rejection festered into bitterness. Yet even in her resentment, she could not escape the gravitational pull of that universe, for her sister's blood ran through her veins. When Dumbledore left baby Harry on her doorstep, he did not just leave an orphan. He left a living reminder of everything she lost: her sister, her chance at magic, her childhood dreams, and an obligation sealed by a letter she never forgot. The absence of this moment in the films flattens Petunia into little more than a caricature. Without it, audiences never understand why she tolerates Harry at all. Her cruelty seems unmotivated, her choice to house him inexplicable. The truth revealed in the book is that Petunia has been living under an invisible contract for more than a decade, a contract inked not only in Dumbledore's words, but also in her own conscience. "Remember my last" is more than a reminder, it is a warning. It tells Petunia that she once agreed to something, and that agreement carried power. She may hate it, she may resent it, but she cannot break it. The artistry of Rowling's writing shines in this exchange because it gives Petunia a tragic undertone. She is not simply an unkind woman, she is a woman who made a choice long ago, a choice that forced her to relive her sister's death every day. Every time she looked at Harry's face, she was reminded of Lily. Every time she locked him in the cupboard under the stairs, she tried to erase the resemblance that haunted her. Yet deep down, she knew that her house was the safest place for him, and that knowledge gnawed at her, demanding her compliance even as it fueled her cruelty. In this sense, her treatment of Harry becomes more understandable, if not excusable. Her harshness was a defense mechanism, a way to keep her emotional distance from the child, who represented everything she could not bear to face. One might wonder why the filmmakers chose to strip this moment away. Perhaps it was a matter of time, perhaps a desire to streamline the story, or perhaps they felt Petunia's complexity was unnecessary for the broader narrative arc. But by doing so, they robbed viewers of one of the rare glimpses into Petunia's humanity. The films leave audiences with the impression that she is a cold, loveless figure defined only by her disdain for magic. The books, however, reveal that she was once a little girl with dreams of her own, a sister who envied but also loved, a woman who could not escape the shadow of a world she both craved and rejected. This absence has broader implications for how fans perceive the Dursleys as a whole. In the films, Vernon and Petunia become comic villains, objects of ridicule rather than serious characters. Dudley receives a small redemption arc with his awkward farewell to Harry in Deathly Hallows, showing a hint of decency, but even that is pared down from the novel. The letter scene would have elevated Petunia beyond this superficial treatment, giving audiences a chance to see her not as a tyrant of suburbia, but as a woman wrestling with the consequences of choices made in grief and fear. It would have added a layer of gravity to the otherwise mundane scenes on Privet Drive. Consider the emotional resonance of Petunia's whispered acknowledgement in the book, "I remember." These two words carry the weight of years of denial. They show that beneath the prim exterior, she has been carrying a secret that even Vernon does not know. It is a moment of vulnerability, a crack in the armor of her carefully controlled life. The films deny viewers this vulnerability, leaving Petunia unscathed by complexity. She becomes, in the cinematic canon, less a character and more a function, someone to mistreat Harry until he is old enough to leave. The contrast between the mediums illustrates how adaptation can change the moral balance of a story. In the novels, Dumbledore's reminder to Petunia casts her in a light that is both tragic and culpable. She is complicit in Harry's suffering, but she is also a prisoner of her own past. Her actions are not simply motivated by malice, but by fear and the ghost of a promise. In the films, however, she is reduced to spite, her motivations erased, her humanity silenced. It is one of the many examples where the depth of Rowling's characters could not fit neatly into the constraints of cinema. Petunia's forgotten letter also reshapes the way readers see Lily's legacy. Lily did not just die to save her son, her death extended its protection through her sister. The blood bond created a chain of safety that bound Harry to the Dursleys' home. Without Petunia's reluctant agreement to take him in, that magic would have failed. Petunia, in her quiet, bitter way, became part of the protective circle that ensured Voldemort could not reach Harry in his early years. It is ironic, almost cruel, that the very sister who once longed for magic, but was denied it, became the unwilling guardian of its most powerful legacy. It is no coincidence that this revelation comes in Order of the Phoenix, a book steeped in themes of memory, loss, and buried truths. Just as Harry learns about the prophecy and the history of the First War, readers also learn that even the smallest details, like a letter left on a doorstep, carry enormous weight. Petunia's confession adds to the tapestry of hidden knowledge, secrets kept too long, and promises that echo across decades. It is a reminder that every character, no matter how peripheral they seem, carries their own history, their own regrets, and their own compromises. The films may have chosen spectacle over subtlety, but the books preserve this haunting detail for those who look closely. The letter to Petunia is not just a plot device, it is a window into her soul. It reveals the complexity of her relationship with Lily, the depth of her resentment, and the quiet, trembling fear that has lived with her since that night on the doorstep. It reminds readers that even the harshest characters are shaped by loss, and that even bitterness can be the mask of a deeper wound. By leaving this moment behind, the films left audiences with only half the truth about Petunia Dursley, but in the pages of the book, her whispered memory remains fragile and unforgettable, a reminder that behind every act of cruelty lies a story, and behind every cold heart there may be a shadow of love that never found a way to heal. Number 22. Financial stinginess. In J.K. Rowling's books, the Dursleys' greed is not a subtle trait, but a constant thread woven into their treatment of Harry Potter. The films show fragments of this, mostly through oversized Dudley and Harry's hand-me-down clothes, yet they soften the sharp cruelty of the novels. On the page, Vernon, Petunia, and Dudley live in a comfortable suburban household, never short of food or luxuries, but they resent every penny that might be spent on the boy in the cupboard under the stairs. Their financial stinginess becomes an unspoken weapon, one that isolates Harry and reinforces his status as the unwanted outsider in their pristine world of Number 4 Privet Drive. The contrast between the Dursleys' treatment of their son and their nephew is deliberate, and money sits at the heart of that difference. Dudley receives the newest video games, the most fashionable clothes, and an endless stream of birthday presents. In the very first book, Petunia counts them proudly, reminding everyone that Dudley will not be satisfied with 36 gifts, because last year he had 37. For Harry, however, the calculation is reversed. Every coin saved at his expense is a coin they can spend on their beloved son. The result is a boy who receives Dudley's stretched-out socks worn through jeans and sweaters that hang off him like curtains. It is not simply frugality, it is targeted deprivation, a signal that in their home, love and money are resources never meant to be wasted on him. The films portray Harry's cupboard as a symbol of neglect, but they rarely linger on the deeper financial cruelty. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Rowling writes, Harry had a thin face, knobbly knees, black hair, and bright green eyes. He wore round glasses held together with a lot of Scotch tape because of all the times Dudley had punched him on the nose. The only thing Harry liked about his own appearance was a very thin scar on his forehead. The Dursleys had tried to keep him in the dark cupboard under the stairs, forcing him into clothes far too big for him, usually Dudley's old ones. The patched glasses, the too long trousers dragging on the floor, the sweaters with stretched sleeves are physical evidence of the Dursleys' greed. Repairing broken glasses with tape instead of replacing them speaks volumes about their priorities. Petunia's obsession with appearances did not extend to Harry. She could spend hours polishing Dudley's trophies or praising Vernon's new company car, but she would never justify spending money on a decent pair of shoes for her nephew. Even at school, Harry's humiliation was compounded by the clothing she forced upon him. He wore sneakers with holes, shirts faded from years of washing, and trousers so baggy that classmates mocked him. This was not incidental detail. Rowling used these descriptions to highlight the deliberate cruelty of treating a child as an expense rather than as family. The films, in smoothing out these nuances, allowed Petunia and Vernon's greed to appear more like comedic stinginess than the deep neglect it truly was. One of the clearest examples of the Dursleys' financial cruelty appears in Philosopher's Stone when Harry receives a coat for Christmas. While Dudley is buried under a mountain of gifts, Harry is handed a 50-pence piece from Uncle Vernon. The moment is sharp and humiliating, a reminder that Harry is not entitled even to the illusion of generosity. A child receiving a coin while his cousin unwraps 20 presents is not simply being neglected, he is being forced to internalize his inferiority. The films omit this scene, perhaps fearing its rawness, but the books linger on the coin as a symbol of the Dursleys' priorities. For Vernon, the gift is not about kindness, but about keeping Harry in his place. Another telling moment occurs in Chamber of Secrets, when Harry is forced to wear a pair of socks so old they are holey and grey. Dudley, in the same household, receives a brand new racing bike and piles of sweets. Rowling contrasts these details not only to emphasize Dudley's spoiled nature, but also to show how far the Dursleys are willing to go to save pennies on Harry. To them, he is a waste of resources, and so long as his basic survival is guaranteed, no more money will be allocated to him. The films, in their brisk pacing, never show the cruel juxtaposition between Dudley's luxuries and Harry's humiliations. What makes this financial stinginess more striking is the fact that the Dursleys are not poor. Vernon is a successful businessman at Grunnings, a drill company, and their home is well kept, their table always filled. They live in a world of abundance, but choose to deny Harry even the basics. Their greed is not born of necessity, but of contempt. It is an active decision to hoard comfort for themselves while marking Harry as undeserving. This transforms money into a tool of control. By depriving him of decent clothing, presents, or even nutritious food, they remind him daily that he is dependent, inferior, and powerless. Rowling underscores this through food as much as through clothing. At breakfast, Dudley's plate is stacked with bacon, sausages, and toast, while Harry is handed the burnt scraps. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Harry is punished with meagre portions, while Dudley devours cakes and ice cream. The refusal to spend on Harry extends to the table, creating a constant reminder that he is considered less than family. The films suggest this imbalance with quick shots of Dudley eating, but the books dwell on it, showing how even in the kitchen, Harry is reminded of his worth in financial terms, as little as possible. The financial neglect also bleeds into Harry's sense of self. He enters Hogwarts with belongings that mark him as different from his peers. His school trunk is filled with Dudley's old rags, and though he later receives robes and supplies from Diagon Alley, his early years of poverty shape his self-image. When Malfoy mocks Ron Weasley for his shabby clothes, Harry recognizes the sting immediately. He knows the humiliation of being singled out for poverty because he lived it daily at Privet Drive. The Dursleys' greed, therefore, leaves scars far deeper than ill-fitting sweaters. It creates a boy who learns not to expect kindness, who assumes generosity is for others. Even gifts from outside the household highlight the Dursleys' greed. When Harry receives his first Hogwarts letters, Petunia and Vernon do everything possible to keep him from opening them, not only out of fear of magic, but also out of a desire to control access to opportunities beyond their financial grip. Knowledge itself becomes a commodity they wish to deny him, as if even information is too valuable a gift. In Philosopher's Stone, Harry finally receives Hagrid's letter, and the contrast is striking. For the first time, someone offers him something freely, without conditions, without counting the cost. This moment is more powerful because of the years of financial deprivation that preceded it. Rowling also uses the Dursleys' greed to create dramatic irony. Readers know that Harry is in fact heir to a small fortune left by his parents in Gringotts Bank. The boy forced to wear Dudley's rags and patch up his glasses actually owns more gold than the Dursleys could imagine. This irony is part of the emotional power of the story. Harry never flaunts his wealth because, unlike his aunt and uncle, he does not measure worth in material terms. But readers are constantly aware that the Dursleys' penny-pinching cruelty is both unnecessary and absurd, a reflection of their small-minded greed rather than Harry's true circumstances. One cannot ignore Dudley's role in this cycle of financial cruelty. He becomes the willing beneficiary of his parents' greed, reveling in the toys, the food, and the privileges denied to Harry. His collection of expensive gifts, his expensive school uniform, and even his private tutors are all funded by resources deliberately withheld from Harry. In Order of the Phoenix, Dudley's gang mocks Harry for his ragged clothes and thin frame, highlighting how the deprivation at home becomes social humiliation in the outside world. The films show Dudley as spoiled, but they do not linger on how his spoiling is directly linked to Harry's deprivation. The symbolism of money in Harry's childhood is crucial. A coin, a sweater, a plate of food, each item becomes a marker of love or rejection. The Dursleys' refusal to spend even small sums on him is a constant reminder that he does not belong. Rowling builds this into the atmosphere of Privet Drive, where neat lawns and polished cars mask the stingy, loveless reality inside the house. For Harry, every day begins with the scrape of a plate or the tug of oversized trousers, reminders that he is not worth investment. The films capture the broad strokes but miss the fine detail, the way money is used as an emotional weapon. When Harry finally leaves Privet Drive for Hogwarts, the transformation is profound. For the first time, he buys clothes that fit, food that satisfies, and items chosen for him rather than passed down. The contrast reveals how deep the Dursleys' financial cruelty ran. What the films show as comic relief, the sight of Harry in oversized clothes, becomes in the books a symbol of systematic deprivation. Rowling wanted readers to see that greed is not only about hoarding wealth, but also about denying dignity to others. For the Dursleys, saving money on Harry was never just about finances, it was about reinforcing power. Number 23, The School for Troubled Youth, cover story. When readers revisit the early chapters of J.K. Rowling's saga, they often notice how carefully the Dursleys construct their public image. On Privet Drive, Vernon and Petunia's life is dominated by appearances: a neat house, a perfectly trimmed lawn, a polite smile for the neighbours. Yet hidden beneath this facade was a peculiar invention of theirs, a story that never made its way into the films. The claim that Harry Potter was not attending a school of magic, but a special school for difficult children. This fabricated tale was not just a passing remark, it was an essential part of their strategy to conceal the truth about Harry's world and to maintain their fragile illusion of normality in the eyes of Mr. and Mrs. Next Door. Rowling paints the Dursleys as people terrified of difference, and nothing could be more threatening to their middle-class perfection than a boy who belonged to a secret magical society. When letters from Hogwarts began flooding through the letterbox, down the chimney, even through the window cracks, Vernon's panic was not merely about Harry receiving an education, it was about the shame of anyone discovering that their nephew was destined for something that could not be explained away in normal terms. To their neighbours, the Polkiss family, or Mrs. Number 7, Harry could not simply vanish each September without a believable cover story. So Vernon and Petunia turned to invention. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Rowling writes that the Dursleys were proud to tell anyone who would listen that Dudley had been accepted at Smelting School, a posh institution for boys. Harry, however, was said to be attending St. Brutus's secure centre for incurably criminal boys. The choice of words was not accidental. By branding Harry as a problem child destined for a strict boarding facility, Vernon and Petunia shielded themselves from uncomfortable questions. What could be more convenient? Neighbours would assume that if Harry was rarely seen or if he appeared thin and poorly dressed, it was the fault of this supposed institution. No one would think to ask further. No one would suspect that he was living among castles, owls, and enchanted feasts. In fact, the story about St. Brutus's becomes one of the clearest examples of the Dursleys' obsession with reputation. It reveals how far they were willing to go in twisting reality just to keep their suburban mask intact. The films omit this detail, perhaps to streamline the plot, but its absence removes a striking dimension of the Dursleys' cruelty. Telling neighbours that your nephew is at a school for criminals is not just lying, it is character assassination. Harry, who already grew up in the cupboard under the stairs, was being saddled with a fake reputation of delinquency in a world where he had no voice to defend himself. Imagine Mrs. Figg, the eccentric cat-loving neighbour, repeating Vernon's words about Harry being at St. Brutus's. Imagine the quiet gossip spreading down the neat rows of identical houses. Poor Dursleys, saddled with that troublesome boy. Rowling even has Uncle Vernon mention the school by name in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, reminding readers of the false narrative whenever outsiders became involved. One of the most vivid examples occurs in Chamber of Secrets, when Harry meets Dobby the house elf. Vernon tries to silence the commotion by shouting, "He's just been expelled from his school. They'll be sending him back to St. Brutus's." The casual cruelty of this line is striking. Not only does Vernon try to punish Harry by threatening expulsion, but he also uses the invented school as a weapon, reinforcing the false image of Harry as a delinquent. This is the moment when readers realize that the lie about the school for criminal boys is not simply for the neighbours. It is also a tool the Dursleys wield against Harry himself, a way to remind him that, in their eyes, he will never be anything other than a burden and a disgrace. The storytelling brilliance lies in how Rowling uses this fabricated school to mirror the Dursleys' psychology. For Dudley there is Smeltings, with its maroon tailcoats, knobbly sticks for hitting each other, and the promise of prestige. For Harry there is St. Brutus's, a shadowy institution that never actually appears on the page, but looms like a dark reflection of Dudley's privilege. It is the perfect metaphor for how Petunia and Vernon divide the world. Their son, groomed for success and superiority. Their nephew, condemned to failure and shame. Readers are invited to see the cruelty not just in the cupboard, the starvation or the insults, but in the narrative that was crafted around Harry's very identity. This choice also reveals much about Petunia's character. She, who had once longed to join her sister Lily at Hogwarts, now actively suppresses the truth about its existence. Instead of acknowledging Harry's real school, she feeds her community a poisonous story about delinquency. This is not merely about protecting a secret, it is about reasserting control. Petunia could not control the magical letters, the arrival of Hagrid, or Harry's undeniable inheritance, but she could control the gossip on Privet Drive. She could look Mrs. Polkiss in the eye and say with a pitying smile that Harry was away at a place for incurably criminal boys, a phrase heavy with disdain, making Harry appear unworthy of sympathy. By erasing this detail, the films unintentionally soften the image of the Dursleys. On screen, they are abusive and petty, but viewers miss the chilling reality of how methodical their abuse was. In the books, the Dursleys craft narratives as carefully as Vernon crafts his business deals at Grunnings. They know reputation is power. Just as Vernon boasted about drills, he boasted about Dudley's prestigious Smeltings. Just as he lied about Harry's school, he lied about the boy's very nature. This double life, the respectable Dursleys in public, the cruel guardians in private, was sustained by the invention of St. Brutus's. For Harry, the invention mattered deeply. It meant that, in his own street, he was not simply the boy who lived with his aunt and uncle. He was, in rumour and whispers, the delinquent sent away for discipline. Every summer when he returned, thin, pale, and overshadowed by Dudley's bulk, the neighbours likely nodded, thinking the special school had failed to fix him. It turned the entire neighbourhood into silent accomplices of his humiliation, unknowingly reinforcing the Dursleys' narrative. This weight of falsehood adds another layer to Harry's loneliness in those early years. What makes the story particularly memorable is how Rowling drops it into the narrative almost casually, as if the Dursleys' cruelty was so routine that they barely thought about it. But, for readers, the detail lingers. The words St. Brutus's secure centre for incurably criminal boys stand out because they are both ridiculous and chilling. They carry the tone of Vernon's blustering exaggeration, but they also highlight the calculated damage of labelling a child as criminal. In a world where Harry's every truth was denied, even his education became a lie. This distortion also helps explain the tension when the magical world collides with the Muggle one. Consider the visit from the Weasleys in Goblet of Fire, when Fred and George accidentally drop a Tung toffee into Dudley's hand. To the Dursleys, this was a nightmare scenario. Wizards on the doorstep, a son transformed, and Harry exposed before the neighbours. What story would Petunia craft then? How much harder would it be to cling to the tale of St. Brutus's when red-haired strangers blasted through the fireplace? The fabricated school worked as long as the magical world stayed hidden, but every breach of secrecy threatened to unravel their carefully spun web of lies. The irony is sharp. The Dursleys wanted nothing more than to appear respectable, yet the lie they chose painted their household as one blighted by juvenile delinquency. They would rather neighbours believe Harry was a criminal than admit he was extraordinary. It says much about their worldview that magic was seen as more shameful than crime. Respectability for Vernon and Petunia was never about truth. It was about conformity, appearances, and control. The school for difficult children was not an accidental fib. It was a window into the twisted hierarchy of values that ruled Number 4, Privet Drive. When readers notice this hidden detail, they understand more fully why Harry's triumph is so remarkable. He rises not only from neglect and verbal abuse, but also from an entire narrative designed to erase him. He enters Hogwarts not as the incurably criminal boy of Vernon's invention, but as the boy who lived, reclaiming his identity from the lies woven around him. This is the power of Rowling's storytelling. Even in small, easily overlooked phrases, she reveals the depth of Harry's struggle against both the magical and the Muggle worlds that sought to define him. Number 24. Petunia's obsession with cleanliness. A visitor stepping into Number 4, Privet Drive, would have noticed something peculiar even before meeting its inhabitants. The curtains were always perfectly drawn, the doormat brushed without a speck of dust, and the gleam of Vernon Dursley's car seemed to carry a hint of menace, as though it had been polished into submission. Yet beneath this picture-perfect suburban order lay a truth that J.K. Rowling's books made clear, but the films largely ignored: Petunia Dursley's obsession with cleanliness and control. She did not merely value tidiness, she demanded it with an intensity that was almost ritualistic, and the one who bore the brunt of this mania was Harry Potter. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Rowling describes Harry spending hours cleaning and scrubbing, his chores extending far beyond the reasonable responsibilities of a boy his age. The cupboard under the stairs was full of spiders, Harry notes, and although this cramped space was his bedroom, it was also the place Petunia sent him to after long sessions of dusting, polishing, and scrubbing floors. It was not enough that the house was clean. It had to shine with a level of order that Petunia used as a shield, proof to the world that she was respectable, normal, and better than her peculiar sister, who had married a wizard. This obsessive cleaning was not just about hygiene, it was a tool of domination. By giving Harry endless tasks, Petunia ensured that he remained in a state of exhaustion, never having time to assert himself or even imagine life beyond servitude. In the Chamber of Secrets, when Aunt Marge was scheduled to visit, Harry was forced to clean the house from top to bottom, polishing the banisters and scrubbing the windows until his arms ached. Rowling paints the picture clearly. Petunia's spotless house was her weapon against embarrassment, and Harry was her instrument. The irony is that this obsession with neatness was not extended with equal intensity to her own son, Dudley. While Dudley sprawled on the couch, surrounded by toys, leaving chocolate wrappers and broken video game parts scattered across the floor, Petunia never turned her cleaning wrath upon him. Instead, she allowed her son to live in chaos, while simultaneously forcing Harry to erase every trace of mess. This double standard is significant, for it reveals that Petunia's fixation with cleaning was less about order and more about power. It was her way of reducing Harry to invisibility. If Harry was always cleaning, always bent over a task, he could never challenge Dudley's position as the pampered centre of the household. In the films, Petunia is portrayed as a fussy, cold woman, but her mania for domestic perfection is scarcely shown. We see Harry in the cupboard, we see him neglected, but we rarely witness the hours of scrubbing, polishing and dusting that defined his daily life. This omission erases a crucial element of his suffering. For Harry, childhood was not only about being locked away, but also about being enslaved to the obsessive rituals of cleanliness that Petunia demanded. The movies, perhaps in their need for brevity, missed the chance to underline just how oppressive the Dursleys truly were. There is a telling moment in the Order of the Phoenix when Petunia notices Harry's untidiness and remarks with sharp disdain, "You haven't been taking care of your things." It is a line that captures her fixation on appearances. For Petunia, Harry's belongings, shabby and few as they were, had to reflect her standards, or else she feared being judged by association. In her mind, cleanliness equated to respectability. If her house gleamed, then no one could suspect that her household concealed a secret, the presence of her magical nephew, whom she resented with every fibre of her being. This obsession with cleaning can also be read as a psychological defense mechanism. Petunia had grown up overshadowed by Lily, her sister, who possessed extraordinary magical gifts. Petunia had none. In fact, in the Philosopher's Stone, she confesses bitterly that Lily had always been the special one. The gleam of her countertops and the polished brass of her doorknobs became the only kind of magic Petunia could perform. She scrubbed and polished not merely out of habit, but as an assertion of control over her own domain. Where Lily had wands and charms, Petunia had feather dusters and polish. For Harry, the impact was profound. The boy who lived spent his early years learning that his value was measured by how well he could make surfaces shine. The hours of cleaning shaped his resilience, his capacity to endure hardship, and his ability to perform without complaint. In the Philosopher's Stone, Rowling makes it clear that Harry was already used to being given impossible chores, describing how he once had to paint the shed and prune the roses before being allowed to return to his cupboard. It was not discipline, it was domination disguised as duty. One of the most vivid examples comes from the Goblet of Fire, where Harry, before leaving for the Quidditch World Cup, is forced by Petunia to weed the garden and wash the car. These tasks are not merely household necessities, but rituals meant to remind Harry of his place. Vernon and Petunia's obsession with appearances extended to every corner of their lives, and Petunia's spotless kitchen or shining windows were not just matters of pride, they were armor against gossip. What would the neighbors say if the Dursleys' home was less than perfect? That question haunted Petunia, and Harry was the answer. The neighbors themselves unknowingly reinforced this obsession. Mrs. Number 7, Mrs. Fig, and others in the area always saw Petunia as the model of suburban order, the woman who prided herself on spotless doilies and freshly washed curtains. It was vital for Petunia to maintain this facade, and Harry's labor made it possible. The boy scrubbing floors was not visible to the outside world, and that invisibility was precisely what Petunia desired. Harry's work was supposed to erase him, making him both useful and unseen. What the films missed in omitting these details is that they stripped away part of Harry's psychological landscape. The books show us a boy shaped not only by neglect, but by endless menial labor. This aspect of his childhood explains his extraordinary humility later in life. When Harry enters Hogwarts, he does not crave luxury or ease. He is simply astonished by being treated as an equal. The house elves in the kitchens, the gleaming great hall, the endless feasts, these are miracles to a boy whose own childhood was defined by cleaning the very spaces he was forbidden to enjoy. Petunia's obsession also offers insight into her complicated feelings toward magic. Her hatred of the magical world manifested not only in sharp words, but in her compulsion to erase every speck of abnormality from her life. The polished floors and spotless countertops were her futile attempt to scrub away her resentment, her envy, and her fear. Her house gleamed because she could not shine in any other way, and so Harry became the object of her cleansing rituals, both the reminder of what she despised and the tool with which she tried to purify her own life. The cruelty of this obsession becomes clearer when one compares Harry's upbringing to Dudley's. Dudley's room overflowed with toys, broken and unkept, his shirts stained with chocolate and crumbs. This chaos was never punished because Petunia's cleaning was never about the mess itself. It was about punishing Harry. Dudley's mess could exist without consequence because it symbolized indulgence and love. Harry's tidiness, enforced through hours of labor, symbolized control and resentment. The gleam of Petunia's flaws was built on the imbalance between her sons, the cherished child and the child she wished would disappear. Perhaps the most haunting aspect is how casually Harry himself reflects on these chores. In the books, he rarely protests because for him it is normal. He speaks of scrubbing, dusting, and polishing with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who does not expect better. This resignation is powerful. It shows that Petunia's obsession worked. Harry internalized the idea that his worth was tied to menial labor. The boy who would later defeat Voldemort began life under the tyranny of a woman armed not with a wand, but with a feather duster. The magic of Rowling's detail is that she makes us see the psychological weight behind something as ordinary as cleaning. The films, by focusing on the broader strokes of the Dursleys' cruelty, missed this smaller, sharper cruelty that shaped Harry just as much. To understand Petunia is to see that her spotless house was not a simple quirk, but a symptom of deeper resentment and fear. To understand Harry is to see that his strength came not only from surviving Voldemort, but from surviving years of being scrubbed into silence. Number 25. Petunia's jealousy of Lily. Petunia Dursley has long been one of the most misunderstood characters in the Harry Potter universe. To many who only watched the films, she is nothing more than a bitter aunt, a cold woman who resents the boy forced into her home. But the books reveal a different shade, a complex inner wound buried beneath her cutting remarks and disapproving glances. Her dislike of Lily Evans, her magical sister, was not simply hatred. It was rooted in envy, in a longing to be part of a world that closed its gates to her. That envy shaped every decision she made and gave depth to her bitterness. It is a truth hidden in the pages, yet almost erased in the cinematic version, leaving her character flatter than it truly was. The moment when Petunia's jealousy becomes undeniable is not during Harry's childhood, but in a flashback to her youth. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Hagrid mentions Lily's magical background, and Harry hears the first pieces of truth about his parents. Later, Petunia's outburst reveals what she has been carrying. My mother and father were so proud, of course, the day she got her letter. We have a witch in the family. I was the only one who saw her for what she was. Freak. The venom in her words is not only anger, but pain. What makes this passage so striking is the detail that Petunia knew all about the Hogwarts letter, the school, the magic, because she was there when Lily was chosen. She had wanted the same recognition. The harshness with which she spits the word freak is the mask she wears to hide the fact that she once dreamed of being the same. This hidden desire surfaces even more clearly in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, but readers do not discover it until much later. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Dumbledore reveals that Petunia had written him a letter when she was young, asking if she could attend Hogwarts too. He answers kindly, yet firmly, only witches and wizards can be accepted. That moment, preserved in Petunia's memory, is proof that she did not merely scorn Lily's abilities, she longed to share them. She wanted to be chosen to step out of her ordinary life, to leave behind the dull predictability of Privet Drive before it even began. That rejection was the wound she never healed from, and it explains why she overcompensated with her obsession for normalcy. The tragedy of Petunia is that she could not admit to herself what she wanted most. Instead of mourning her exclusion, she rewrote the story in her head. Lily was not gifted but strange, not blessed but cursed, not special but abnormal. This psychological defense is classic envy. What you cannot have, you must degrade, so that its absence does not consume you. Yet the cracks in this facade appear in fleeting moments. When she tells Harry in Order of the Phoenix that she knows exactly what Dementors are, the revelation stuns her family. Vernon gapes, Dudley is confused, and Harry realizes she had far more awareness of the magical world than she let on. That single confession is a slip. Truth, she had listened, remembered, and carried scraps of Lily's stories with her long after she had sworn to reject them. This detail, almost whispered in the books, never makes it to the films. On screen, Petunia appears only as a cold housewife, her disdain simplified to cruelty. But the omission erases the complexity of her pain. Consider how different her portrayal would feel if audiences had seen her letter to Dumbledore dramatized, or her shocked admission about Dementors emphasized. Instead, viewers saw only a caricature, missing the rich undertones of envy that made her human. Without these glimpses, her dislike of Harry appears baseless, when in fact it is rooted in the shadow of her sister's brilliance. It is crucial to remember that Lily's magic changed not just her own life, but Petunia's as well. Their parents adored Lily's gift, celebrated it, and treated her like the shining star of the family. Petunia, left in the shadows, became the ordinary daughter. She was not mistreated, but she was overlooked, and in that small gap grew a resentment that could never be quelled. When one sibling is constantly praised for something the other cannot possess, even the strongest bond frays. The films show Petunia's bitterness, but not the wound from which it sprang. It was not hatred of Lily as a person, it was the unbearable reminder of what Petunia could never be. The resentment shaped her choice of partner. Vernon Dursley embodied everything Petunia decided to value: stability, predictability, and a disdain for the strange. It was no coincidence that she gravitated toward a man who reinforced her own narrative of normalcy. Vernon, who prized appearances and rejected anything odd, provided her with a fortress against the magical world that had rejected her. Together, they built a life that was the antithesis of Lily's. Petunia clung to that world with desperation, not because she loved it deeply, but because it proved she had chosen correctly, or so she told herself. Deep down, she was still that little girl who wished for a Hogwarts letter. The echo of that envy never disappeared. When Harry arrived on her doorstep, the reminder became unbearable. Every glance at him with his mother's eyes reopened the wound she had tried to bury. "You think I don't know what they're saying about us? That we kept you? My perfect sister died and left me with you," she once screamed. Beneath the anger lies the sorrow of being forced to shelter the living proof of everything she had wanted, but could not have. Harry was not just Lily's son, he was the embodiment of the world Petunia had begged to join. No wonder her treatment of him was so severe. His very existence was an insult to the life she had built. Even in her most hostile moments, small traces of envy peek through. When Dumbledore explains the protective magic that keeps Harry safe at Privet Drive, it is because of Petunia's bloodline, Lily's blood flowing in Harry's veins and hers. Petunia is tethered to the magical world whether she likes it or not. The irony is cruel. She longed to belong, was denied, then spent her life running from it, only to discover she could never fully escape. The letter she once wrote to Dumbledore echoes like a ghost in every scene she shares with Harry, even if she never admits it aloud. The films stripped away this psychological layering, leaving audiences with a villainous rather than a wounded sister. Yet the books invite us to see her with nuance. Consider the passage in Order of the Phoenix, where Petunia almost speaks up as the Dursleys argue about whether to throw Harry out. She knows the protection magic matters. She knows what the consequences could be. For a fleeting second she sides with the boy, though reluctantly. That act, however small, is the shadow of her youthful longing, an acknowledgement that part of her still recognizes the power she once dreamed of wielding. She is not simply cruel, she is conflicted. When readers recognize this envy, Petunia's story shifts from one of malice to one of tragedy. She becomes not the wicked aunt of fairy tales, but a woman who spent her life locked out of wonder, forced to watch it flourish in others. The intensity of her scorn comes not from a lack of love, but from too much longing. This dynamic explains her contradictions. She both despised and obsessed over Lily's world, mocked it while secretly remembering its details, rejected Harry while keeping him alive under her roof. Envy can twist love into hatred, and that is exactly what defined her. In this sense, Petunia is as much a victim of the magical divide as any muggle. She bore the burden of knowing what lay beyond her reach, but being powerless to touch it. Unlike Vernon, who never cared to know, Petunia had tasted the possibility, written the letter, dreamed the dream. Her bitterness was born not of ignorance, but of knowledge. That difference is what makes her more complex than any of the films suggest. She is not a simple foil to Harry's innocence, but a character caught in the shadow of her sister's brilliance, condemned to live a life she did not choose. The greatest irony of all is that Petunia's life was still touched by magic, whether she admitted it or not. She was the reason Harry lived, the blood tie that protected him, the reluctant guardian of the boy who would save their world. Though she never embraced her sister's gift, she carried its consequences every day. If envy defined her, so too did the secret bond that no bitterness could erase. And that is the fact the films chose to leave behind. Petunia Dursley was not simply a woman who hated magic, she was a woman who once wished for it, who envied it, and who built her entire life around the wound of its absence. Number 26. Hatred of Owls. Under the roof of Number 4, Privet Drive, the world of magic and the rigidly ordinary life of the Dursley family clashed in countless small but deeply telling ways. One of the most striking details left untouched by the films was the presence of Harry's owl, Hedwig, and the profound discomfort, bordering on hatred, that Vernon, Petunia, and Dudley felt whenever the snowy bird appeared. While the films softened Hedwig's role into that of a silent, loyal companion, the books layered her presence with tension, secrecy, and outrage from Harry's guardians. This was not simply irritation at a noisy pet, but a symbol of everything they feared about the wizarding world intruding into their carefully polished suburban image. The Dursleys had cultivated a life that thrived on appearances. Vernon prized neat lawns, freshly washed cars, and an air of perfectly normal, thank you very much. Into this world came Hedwig, not with the subtlety of a caged canary, but with the grace of wings cutting the air and talons scratching the glass at midnight. Rowling described how Hedwig often tapped on Harry's window after flights, and every beat of her wings was, for Vernon, a threat to the fragile illusion of normality. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Vernon Dursley famously shouted, "I will not have some ruddy great bird mess up my perfectly normal life." That line was more than anger. It revealed his panic that Hedwig's very existence could expose them to neighbours and co-workers. The owl's behaviour itself fed into the family's terror. Unlike a dog or cat, Hedwig did not meow or bark within the boundaries of what Petunia considered proper domestic sound. She screeched, hooted, and clawed at cages when she was confined. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Rowling paints a vivid image. Hedwig was shut in her cage, rattling the bars in fury. Vernon reacted as if every hoot would echo across Privet Drive, alerting the entire neighbourhood to their hidden shame. To him, Hedwig was not a pet, but a walking, flying announcement that the Dursleys harboured something unnatural under their roof. One of the most unsettling aspects for Vernon was the fact that owls delivered mail. For a man who prided himself on order, bills arriving in neat envelopes through the letterbox, the notion of letters carried by an owl represented a violation of both privacy and order. When letters poured into the house in the first book, Vernon's paranoia escalated to the point of nailing "shut the letterbox." Though those letters were not all brought by Hedwig, the association lingered. An owl perched in Harry's room symbolized the ever-present possibility of more magical intrusions. Vernon's fear of neighbors noticing was not irrational in his mind. What if Mrs. Number 7 saw a snowy owl circling the house at night? He often threatened to throw the bird out into the garden, not because Hedwig was dangerous, but because her very visibility was a risk to his suburban reputation. Petunia's reaction was slightly different, but no less hostile. To her, Hedwig was a constant reminder of her sister Lily and the world she had been excluded from. Owls belonged to that hated other life, the life of magic that had stolen her sister and left her bitterly clinging to normality. When Hedwig swooped into Harry's room, tapping on glass with a message from Hogwarts or Hagrid, Petunia flinched as though Lily herself had appeared at the window. Ruling notes in Prisoner of Azkaban that Petunia complained about the racket that bird makes, but her words often masked deeper resentments. For her, the owl was a living embodiment of everything she wished did not exist. Dudley's role in the household dynamic added another layer of cruelty. While he often feared Hedwig's sharp beak, Dudley also found amusement in mocking Harry's bird. He was known to press his face to the cage, tease, or recoil dramatically as if attacked. In the second book, Vernon snapped at Harry, "Why can't you keep that animal quiet?" while Dudley smirked from the corner. To Dudley, Hedwig was simply another way to underline Harry's difference and alienation. The more his parents raged, the more satisfaction he derived, enjoying the sense of superiority as Harry struggled to defend the only creature who connected him to his true world. The irony of this dynamic was that Hedwig was the most elegant and composed figure in the house, described by Rowling as proud, with snowy white feathers and amber eyes. Hedwig represented wisdom and dignity. Yet to the Dursleys, she was a menace. Their fear was irrational, but it revealed their deepest insecurity, that no matter how many hedges were trimmed or how spotless the car in the driveway gleamed, magic could not be contained by walls or social masks. The owl, as ordinary to a wizard as a postman's bag, became a daily reminder that Harry's identity, and by extension their shame, was impossible to erase. Rowling sharpened this contrast by using moments of comedy tinged with menace. In the Chamber of Secrets, after Dobby's disastrous pudding incident, Hedwig tried to peck her way out of the cage as Vernon fumed at Harry. Vernon's fury rose not only because of the magical chaos, but because of the owl's frantic noises adding to the scandal. He thundered about throwing the ruddy bird out, and for Harry, the words carried the chilling possibility that Hedwig might actually be cast aside. This was more than idle threats. Vernon was a man who nailed shut letterboxes, who drove his family to remote huts on rocks in the sea to escape letters. His obsession with control suggested that, had Harry not defended Hedwig, Vernon's rage could have translated into action. The filmmakers, while capturing Vernon's blustering temper, downplayed this constant battle with Hedwig. On screen, Hedwig perched quietly, a symbol of companionship. Off-screen, in the pages of the novels, she was the focus of a war of nerves. Vernon's hatred was loud and exaggerated, Petunia's silent and simmering, Dudley's mocking and cruel. For Harry, every hoot in the night carried the risk of punishment, another lecture, or even the loss of his beloved friend. This tension magnified Harry's loneliness, for Hedwig was not only a pet, but his only confidant in those early years, the one creature who connected him to the world he longed for. The symbolism of Hedwig's treatment cannot be overstated. The Dursleys tried to suppress her the way they tried to suppress Harry's identity. They locked her in cages, forbade her to fly, and threatened her existence, echoing how they confined Harry to cupboards, locked his belongings, and punished his difference. In many ways, Hedwig became a mirror of Harry's own struggle, both trapped in a hostile house, both enduring the resentment of those who feared what they could not understand. There is a particularly telling passage in The Prisoner of Azkaban when Harry secretly writes letters to his friends. Hedwig was the only way to send them. Rowling describes how she fluttered impatiently, eager to fly, but Harry had to sneak around to avoid Vernon's wrath. The scene is heavy with irony, a boy forced to beg his owl for silence, to smuggle messages under his uncle's nose, while the Dursleys raged that he should have no contact with that lot. This detail, erased from the films, highlights the way Hedwig embodied freedom, and the Dursleys' hatred of her was their hatred of freedom itself, freedom from their control, freedom from their world. The tension also underscored the fragile truce that governed Harry's summers. Hogwarts was his sanctuary, Hedwig his link to that life. But every summer she became a prisoner, and every summer Vernon lashed out at the reminder that Harry belonged elsewhere. When the Ministry of Magic enforced restrictions on underage magic, Harry had little power to fight back, but Hedwig's presence defied that rule. Her very existence was magical, and Vernon could do nothing but fume. In that, the Dursleys' hatred was tinged with helplessness. They could not destroy her without destroying their carefully maintained veneer of control over Harry.